you everybody for being with us. So I do prepare a little notes, but based on what I just learned from the data session, it was so in-depth, so I decided to change. So surprise is coming. So assuming we have a perfect data process during the product development cycle, then we train our model, we make sure our model performs well and meet our gating criteria so we can go from POC into the production. Then when we get ready from the POC to production, how we operationalize the AI solution or AI product, it becomes very challenging. So today, with this overcoming the operational challenges and infrastructure challenges for AI solution, we're going to touch three main themes. One is during the operation, how we introduce operational efficiency to manage and maintain the model and data performance, followed by the infrastructure, how we choose the smart infrastructure choices so we can maximize the business value. Lastly is really the external factors we truly need to consider to maximize the business value from the security, from the compliance, from privacy, from legal perspective. So with this, we'll get into the first one, operational efficiency, but we start with data. So moving from POC into the production, what are the data quality stream alongside with it? Then as part of the enterprise data management, what can be the best practice for enterprises to deploy to maintain the data quality? Maybe Ivan, we'll start with you.
All right. So in order to maintain quality, one of the ideas that I think we've seen an uptick for in 2024 has been this concept of what we call prompt unit testing. So we're all familiar as software engineers with basic unit testing, right? It's become an instrumental part of our software development practices. But specifically, when it comes to LLMs, which is this new technology, very black box, there are all kinds of factors that we don't know that could be impacting the responses we have in production. So for example, let's say you're calling GPT-4o from OpenAI or Claude 3.5. They retrain their model, it's showing better results, they deploy that today, right? And suddenly, something that you were relying on working in production has changed for your use cases. So one of the best practices that we see is this idea of setting up these unit tests, having 50, 100, even 1,000 prompts, and regularly testing that every day, every week, to see if what you expect to be working is still working exactly as intended.
Wonderful. So one thing I realized is very special for our panel is we have a very mixed perspective from the data perspective, from the investor, from the CIO, and from the application perspective. So Irene, what is your investor's point of view on this?
Yeah, I would actually touch back on like the data governance side of things and maybe combine, so I've been investing for the last 4 years with Workday Ventures, but before that I spent 8 years in product at Workday where I mostly led up our platform product team. And so I think about it from, the Workday product days of, the early days. We were one of the very first SaaS businesses out there. And I kind of liken, the move to the cloud to this move to AI right now, where, there are a lot of questions, concerns, like with SaaS, it was how is my data, going somewhere else, but also how is it going to be supported? And so I'm actually going to talk about contracts a little bit, which I know came up in a prior panel, but with Workday, we had to define what it meant to sign up with a SaaS provider with your very, very sensitive people and financial data. And so we wrote very strict MSAs with our customers, really detailed in how we were not going to access their data, even from a support perspective, the authorization they would have to give us for all of that, which obviously worked well for Workday, but I think also, as we wanted to implement new features, did mean that we had to get customers to opt in when we wanted to do something more advanced and more innovative. And so I talk about that just because I think now with AI and sort of customers having a lot of these same questions and concerns about their data and what's happening with it, I do think, acknowledging those concerns and being very clear and very detailed about what data is being used, where is it going, is it going to be training things, and contractually acknowledging those things, especially for larger enterprise customers and more highly sensitive data, I think that's really important. And we're hearing that coming up. So from the investor lens, we hear that come up a lot for our startups. So they're telling us that procurement cycles are getting longer with these enterprise companies. They've added new AI questionnaires that you have to be ready to answer. And so I think these questions are here, and companies are trying to figure out what to ask and what actually makes them feel better. But this is a time where I think all of this is being defined, and what is acceptable is also still being defined.
Thank you. So along the AI journey, based on my own, over a decade journey on machine learning and AI, I started to realize that the converge of CIO and CTO, and many of those are really systematic challenges. We should work together to overcome this. So Tim, I think earlier today you brought up the great point about value, about the culture change, in order to embrace the AI journey. So any aspect you can share with this audience on that part?
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for coming today. One of the things that CIOs go through, and I should probably provide a little context, that having been a CIO in the past and now advising CIOs across the gamut of industries, I see some commonality and some common conversations that are coming up again and again. And one of the things is you'll start to see development of AI projects that are moving from POCs to production, kind of falling into one of two veins. They either fall into an efficiency play, meaning there's an opportunity for efficiency, which often you can throw more people at the problem. There are other ways to be able to solve that particular problem. But then there's also the other side of this, which is around innovation. And so innovation really opens the door for your company in doing things you couldn't otherwise do before. You couldn't throw more people at the problem. And the reason why I break that up is because when you start to think about value and you start to think about doing all of these different experiments, and eventually some of those, not necessarily all of them, but some of them might move to production, you have to make a value judgment. You have to understand what is the opportunity here, but also, as you've heard in the past panels, what are the risks that come with that? And so it's a balancing act. And so efficiency projects tend to have a higher bar they have to get over, because it's a lot squishier with the math than the innovation, which is something that you couldn't otherwise do. And so it's a new opportunity for your company. And so it's important to understand the value of what you're doing from a business standpoint. And this kind of ties back to the investor side too, but within each of your companies and the work you're doing, what is the true business value, not technology value, business value that your company, that your project or any given project is providing to your company or has the potential to? And having that honest conversation is really one of the key pieces that has to come into the vernacular and into the evaluation of which POCs ultimately either get dumped, not necessarily because they're bad, but maybe they just didn't provide enough value, versus those that did provide enough value and get over that threshold to be able to move it forward.
Perfect. So I heard the process, the people, and the business value. Business value many times are achieved through the product consumed by our customers or users. So Ping, you are on the application level. Can you share a little bit insight from that perspective, how you set up the framework or best practice for data quality standard?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for joining the panel. Just for introduction, Questa is an AI platform that helps contact center transform. We have one single workforce management platform that helps AI agents as well as the human agents in contact center. So contact center is very interesting because there are many different AI use cases, right? And to summarize, how do we handle the data quality and model drifting issues, right? First is really just because we are in the workflows, we capture the human input and output, right? So it's really about establishing the feedback, right? And I can give example. For example, we have an auto suggestion model that's digital agents, right? And when the customer requests come in, we can automatically generate that response based on historical conversations and interactions. And then now, the agent can choose to click on it without typing, or choose to type it if the quality of the response is not good. So we keep on tracking, the click-through rate, right, with that response, so we can know whether there's a model drift or there's a change in business, so that we need to retrain the model, right? So every time we see there's a decline, that can be, it's just a very practical way. And then the other thing that we practice that we do is that in production, we try to distill the model for efficiency and latency and cost reasons. But when we evaluate, when we sample, we try to use large models. We use the state-of-the-art biggest model. So sometimes we just use the large language model as the evaluator, right? So we can always sample. For example, we also automate a lot of customer after-call work for agents. Agents used to have to take notes, right? They have to write long notes and spending maybe a few minutes, and then now all of these are auto-generated, right? And then, but the generation model is a much smaller model, so we now can use larger model to sample the output of of these smaller model generate and see whether it's a good quality or not, right? So that's another way that we use in practice. And then the third thing is just that there's no silver bullet here. Like, we also sample and have operationalize a team, that a conversation analyst, right? So they will periodically sample those conversations, and then we have the entirely internal tools that built for them to give feedback, whether this is a good classification or not good classification for behavior discovery or behavior detection models. So again, for different models, there are different practices, but it's just a combination of using the feedback, using the LLM, larger LLM, more powerful LLM, and then the third is just operationalize a data labeling team.
Thank you so much, Ping. So if I heard you correctly, right, AI can also be used for virtual judge, for example. AI can be the virtual human to generate those synthetic data to test. More importantly, it's really to introduce this feedback loop with human and other AI help. Then I want to go back to Ivan, because I wanted to learn a little bit more about the tooling or the framework, because your background, maybe you can share a little bit more on that, the feedback, the human in the loop thing.
Okay, this is one of those curveballs you were talking about. So data source started, we've been around for 6 years, and our original product was in the data labeling space. So we have a data labeling platform for everything NLP, text, documents, and audio. We've been subscribed to human in the loop our entire existence now. It's built into the product from the ground up. There are many different types of labeling required to train and fine-tune and improve these models. One of the big areas of focus for the last couple of years is that we've seen a lot of folks utilize LLMs for actually semi-automating their labeling, right? So you no longer need to pay interns, contractors to label that Seattle is the name of a city or that Starbucks is the name of a cafe. An LLM can do a lot of that for you. So what we're seeing is a great deal of advancement and cost savings to semi-automate maybe 70, 80% of your work, but really have that last level of human intelligence to understand, to validate and verify the data before it goes into your model.
Thank you, because I myself work AI product solution at Airbnb, so we spent huge amount of investment on this human labeling effort, in addition to the AI as a judge, AI as a human. So must have effort and continuous effort too. So before production and during the production is a continuous journey. Okay, so I like to shift the topic a little bit because we have AI models, then into the production, if we zoom out a little bit, we have to land those models or solutions on our infrastructure. Infrastructure can be in cloud, infrastructure can be on premises, or hybrid. So I like to touch base this topic a little bit. Maybe Tim, we can start with you from a CIO point of view.
Yeah, I think the first question that you have to ask yourself, and it's the same question that you have to ask yourself as you go from POC to production, is what is your organization capable of? You know, we talk about this as leaders. What is your organizational capabilities? And so just because maybe your organization should do something doesn't necessarily mean it can do something. And you have to have this honest conversation because you could end up going down the road and quickly realizing that you're at a dead end, you're stuck. And the reason why I bring this up is because that does factor into the decisions around whether you use on-prem infrastructure, whether you use cloud infrastructure. You have to think about the org, you have to think about what you're trying to do, and also, is this something that you should be doing organizationally, even if you do have the resources to do it? Maybe this isn't something differentiating for your company, in which case, using cloud-based resources makes a lot of sense for that. Maybe you don't have the resources to be able to do this. Running an infrastructure, operating an infrastructure, and I have some experience with this. I, like my colleague over here, used to be at Stanford. Well, I used to be at Stanford. He's still at Stanford. But I used to run the infrastructure at the Graduate School of Business, and that was both our IT infrastructure, but also our research infrastructure. And I'll tell you, when you run models and you run infrastructure for models, that's very expensive infrastructure. And so you want to maximize the capability of it and the utilization of it. And for most IT organizations, they don't necessarily sit in that mindset to be able to fully utilize the capability of these really, really expensive resources. Research computing organizations typically do. And so this is one of the reasons why when you're thinking about moving things into production, you have to ask yourself, what is your organization capable of and what should it do? And this is where a lot of folks then start to go, you know what, this is a bridge too far for me internally to think about all this. Public cloud is a space that would be better off for me to consume.
Thank you for sharing. Again, back to the business value and your organizational capability. How can you achieve your value and what to do? Anything else from the highly regulated sector, or Irene, have you observed any trend from the startup perspective, based on the value, capability, and other factors we can consider?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so for Workday ourselves, we host, it's on-prem for Workday in some sense because we are the hosting provider for many of our customers. But when I've met with startups over the years, I've always asked what their deployment options are, because if we are to utilize it in the Workday product, it's very difficult for us to call out to something else in the cloud because it's so hard for other vendors to adhere to our strict contract requirements. Rewind 2 years ago, most companies would say, no, we're only hosted in the cloud. That's the only option. Sort of interestingly, the last year or so, I get we can do VPC, and in some cases, you can self-deploy. And so it's sort of interesting to see that trend starting to happen. For sure, it depends on the sensitivity of the data, like what the service actually provides, who you're selling to. So I've been spending a lot of time with some of these AI software development startups, and you see the ones that are orienting toward large enterprise companies, it's like on-prem, it's every customer has their own model. They've figured out a way to do synthetic data creation to train the model, so no customer data needs to be done to train the model. So I think there's creative ways that startups are approaching this, but I definitely see this shift and willingness to do more on-prem or VPC deployments. Some startups have explicitly said it needs to be a big enough deal for us to consider doing something that is self-deployed, because obviously there's a maintenance overhead, so that's, yet another factor to think about.
Infrastructure is a big thing.
Can I add one more piece to this to build,
Sure.
Which is to put some context on governance and especially around regulatory. Just in the United States today, there are over 400 pieces of legislation working through state legislatures. In California alone, it's over 30. Now, one that got a lot of publication, I think it was State Bill 1047, if I've got the number right. It's funny because the governor just vetoed that, but just because the governor vetoed it, I would expect there's going to be more on the heels of that that's coming. It's only a matter of time. And so it's going to be important for you to think about that, and then that comes into the balance of what data do we touch and do we work with based on the regulations that we're going to have to adhere to. And then you have to make a business judgment as to, well, some of this data might be a little too hot to handle, and so therefore we want to kind of peel it back or use synthetic data or take a different approach. So I just wanted to add a little bit of color to what you were saying, because I think this is a really important point. It isn't all roses going down this path. There are thorns along the way, and it's important that you understand that and have both eyes open.
Absolutely. Regulatory or even privacy, the rising concern, a different region, how we go to market, even you want to maximize your business value, you have to be extremely cautious what to do and when and how to enter particular marketplace, right? So before we dive into more security regulatory discussions, I do want to ask Ping a question about this enterprise AI solution or integration. After we identify the infrastructure, enterprise has complex systems. Many of those are siloed. From the data perspective, from experience perspective, they're all siloed. And when we deploy the Gen AI solution with those legacy systems, how you communicate with customers in terms of integration strategy, or what factors we need to consider when we integrate those legacy systems together.
Yeah, so particularly in contact center, it's a very complex environment actually for some of the large enterprises. And typically you can see like they have probably 8 or 9 different pieces of software, and then a lot of those systems may not even have APIs, right? So now the question is, how do we get into, I have a lot of thoughts around it, and also related to some question, I think it's pretty heavily discussed in the media is like, when will call center agents, their job will all be gone, right? So I think my answer is, that will probably take longer than most people anticipate. Part of the reason is just the complexity of the enterprise environment, right? And then from our perspective for Questa, so we have to tap into the real-time audio, right? So that's how we understand what's going on and be a proactive co-pilot. And we have come up with many different creative ways to do it. For example, one is to deploy directly, on the agent desktop, right? So tap into the audio driver so that we can get the audio without touching the on-premise, sometimes on-premise hardware, those telephony system that's decades old. But sometimes we run into customer, they said we want to use state-of-the-art AI, but we only have hard phones. Like we do not even have software phones. And your desktop approach will not work. So in those cases, then we bite the bullet and we build our own SIP infrastructure and tap into the on-premise telephony system, and we become the only vendors that we cannot even find partners to work with us to solve that problem. And So that's another thing. And then the third thing is I actually think that longer term, probably the best way to avoid all these integrations is to just deploy at the agent desktop, like on the laptop. Because the entire environment, if you think about it, AI is really about automating. It's creating a digital robot, right? The entire enterprise environment is also optimized for humans, right? So there are a lot of those systems. There are no API, but there's always a graphic user interface. And I do think that when AI agent gets better and better, not only just hearing and understanding conversation, but able to kind of see and understand the screen, understand the pixels, right? Be able to kind of operate the mouse and the keystrokes just like humans. And then we will get to the point where you only need to, the laptop itself will become autonomous. You will deploy AI agents that can understand, operate on a laptop, and then hear it, and then be able to speak and click just like a human. I think that's probably the end game of solving all these very complex enterprise integrations. But I think that's just my...
I heard you, Ping. I also heard earlier today the session we need resource management department for AI agents. So that may be the future. But before we jump into that future, I wanted to spend a couple more minutes on the regulatory, security, compliance. So all those are the risks. It depends on how your business wants to perceive your positioning. Actually, we should have a different policies, different approaches. So I wanted to ask maybe every guest here one question: how you can balance the risk and still proceed the innovation? What is the thought process you have? Maybe we can start with Ping, then 30 seconds for each.
Yeah, so in particular, in our case, we have a virtual agent, voice agents, right? It's on the phone, right? And there are a lot of risks when people ask random questions about, tell me your password, right? And my name is blah, blah, blah. So there are a lot of red team that testing that Ivan just mentioned about unit testing to make sure the prompt, we have all kind of different corner cases and set up a way that unit test the bot so that make sure that the LLMs, it's always in check and then always guardrailed. I mean, that's the approach that we're taking right now.
Tim?
I think the thing to do is you have to clearly understand what it is that you are going after from a business standpoint. What is that business objective that you're driving toward, and how does it align with something that is tied to your executive team and one of their objectives? Ultimately, that's where you want to go. You don't always get that opportunity, but you have to understand the opportunity against the risk, because that is part of your core equation that comes to this little term called value. And so value is not just the upside, but it's also the downside too. But it's important to put that in context, because there was the conversation in the last panel around guardrails. In some ways, guardrails can be restrictive, but depending on your purpose, guardrails actually might be helpful. What I mean by that is, if you are trying to control how data is managed or where it goes or policies or governance requirements, that's one thing. But let's say you're trying to create a brand new graphic that has never been created before. Well, you might not want to have as stringent guardrails. So again, it comes back to context. So I think when you're thinking about opportunity and risk, it's important to understand what's the true form of risk from a financial, reputational, legal perspective, and put that against that value equation.
I think those are all great points. I would just add, I think Workday's taken a strong stance on responsible AI. And so, beyond just technically what we can do, I think part of it is defining what are your principles around building AI responsibly. And today it's very manual, I think, both at Workday, but there just aren't really tools out there. But even just defining those principles and ensuring there's a governance process internally as you're building things, that every PM, every engineer is thinking about these questions and have thought through those as they go along, I think that goes a long way.
David?
I'll keep it short and pragmatic. This is my new toy, the iPhone Pro 16. And so open source and LLMs, right, or SLMs. I think open source has come a really long way, and it's going to open new doors, especially for highly regulated industries. So I think the conversation will shift once we're aware of what we can have even on a device in pocket. So keep an eye out for the open source technologies.
Great. I just like to add one more data point here. So when we talk about privacy or regulatory or user informations, we typically address that from compliance perspective. So we actually believe that the privacy should start with design, how you engage your user experience, how you design your experience. Privacy is not afterthought approach. Only if you can move those thinking ahead when you start your AI journey, I feel like that's how we can tackle those issues fundamentally. So with this, I think we are ending this session. So hopefully you're getting some practical best practices from this panel. And thank you for all the great panelists, and thank you for being with us.